So, starting with the chapter Diseases of Gastrointestinal System and Liver from edition 10th of Ghai, page number 294. Let's start. Most diseases of the gastrointestinal tract present with few symptoms such as the vomiting, dysphagia, abdominal pain, distension, diarrhea, constipation, gastrointestinal bleeding, and failure to thrive. If these symptoms are present, then you can think that the GI system is being involved. Appropriate evaluation involves assessment of the symptoms and signs, listing differential diagnosis, and planning investigations so as to arrive at the correct diagnosis and initial treatment. Starting with the first topic, that is vomiting. Vomiting refers to the expulsion of gastric contents through the mouth, and vomiting should be differentiated from regurgitation. Okay, especially in infants. Regurgitation is the involuntary and effortless expulsion of the small amounts of gastric contents that is not accompanied by nausea. So, how will you differentiate between this? That in regurgitation, no, it is not accompanied by nausea. Regurgitation is, and it is the expulsion of small amount of gastric contents. Okay, recurrent or persistent vomiting requires thorough evaluation. Persistent vomiting may be complicated by dehydration, there can be hypokalemic, hypochloremic metabolic alkalosis, there can be malnutrition and constipation. And vigorous vomiting can uncommonly result in a mucosal tear called as the Mallory-Weiss syndrome or esophageal rupture called as the Boyer-Haave syndrome. So I have a very stupid trick to remember how to remember that esophageal rupture is seen in the Boyer-Haave syndrome, like Boyer have a rupture. Boyer have a rupture. Okay. Vomiting is a common but often non-specific symptom that may be acute, chronic, or recurrent. Acute onset short duration vomiting is the most common and is often caused by viral infection. Okay, mostly it is caused by a viral infection. Chronic vomiting may be a cyclical, which is characterized by stereotype episodes occurring infrequently with complete normalcy in between. In cyclical, there will be episodes occurring infrequently, but there will be complete normalcy in between. Or it can be chronic, characterized by ongoing low frequency vomiting for weeks. Now, reading about the causes of vomiting, it can be gastrointestinal or non-gastrointestinal. First, reading about the acute causes related to the gastrointestinal one: gastroenteritis, hepatitis, appendicitis, small intestinal obstruction like the malrotation, volvulus, and intussusception, cholecystitis, that is inflammation of gallbladder, and pancreatitis. Now, reading about the acute causes with non-gastrointestinal system like the infections, UTI, meningitis, encephalitis, pertussis, raised intracranial tension, diabetic ketoacidosis, defects in the fatty acid oxidation or respiratory chain, and drug or toxin induced. So these were all the acute causes. Now the chronic causes of vomiting. These include gastroesophageal reflux, gastritis, gastric outlet obstruction, like the hypertrophic pyloric stenosis and peptic ulcer. Small bowel obstruction. There are two obstructions in the chronic one, right? Gastric outlet and small bowel, like the duodenal stenosis and annular pancreas and superior mesenteric artery syndrome. These are the causes of small bowel obstruction. Which one? Duodenal stenosis, annular pancreas, and superior mesenteric artery syndrome. Also, food allergy can cause chronic vomiting, and achalasia cardia, gastroparesis, and esophagitis. These were all the chronic causes of gastrointestinal system. Oh, sorry. These were all the chronic causes of vomiting involving the gastrointestinal system. Now, the chronic causes involving non-gastrointestinal are raised intracranial tension can cause vomiting, chronic sinusitis, uremia, and overfeeding. In the recurrent one, there can be cyclic vomiting, abdominal migraine, or malrotation with volvulus. These are the recurrent causes of uh, vomiting involving the GI system. Fine. There is something called as the abdominal migraine also, and the non-gastrointestinal system involving chronic recurrent vomiting causes are urea cycle defects, diabetic ketoacidosis, and Addison's disease. We read about this also, right? The chronic causes in not involving the GI system are raised ICP, raised intracranial tension, chronic sinusitis, uremia, and overfeeding. Now moving ahead, reading about the evaluation. A detailed history and examination often gives clue to the diagnosis. The etiology of vomiting varies according to the age. While infectious causes occurs across all the ages, infectious causes, most congenital anomalies like the atresia and metabolic disorders present in the neonatal period or infancy. The first step to determine whether the vomitus is bilious or non-bilious. Okay, so first step is to determine whether the vomitus is bilious or non-bilious. Lesions beyond the ampulla of Vater cause bilious vomiting, and those proximal to it leads to non-bilious vomiting. Okay, this line is important. That lesions beyond what ampulla of Vater causes bilious vomiting. That there will be bile present in the vomiting, giving it a greenish color, and those proximal to it leads to non-bilious vomiting. So if we are writing in the history that non-bilious vomiting, so the lesion is occurring before the ampulla of Vater. Okay. Associated features may indicate etiology. Example: vomitus contains stale food ingested on the previous day. It can give a hint towards the gastric outlet obstruction if there is vomitus containing stale food and stale food ingested on the previous day. Now, if there is visible peristalsis, no, then you can think about obstruction. If there is vomiting in the early morning, then it can be intracranial neoplasm or cyclical vomiting syndrome. There is something called as the cyclic vomiting syndrome also. And if there is vertigo, middle ear disorder can be involved. If there is hypotonia, there can be mitochondrial disorders. This is something new that I've never heard of. That in the if there is vomiting associated with hypotonia, na, then you have to think about the mitochondrial disorders. So yeah, this was some associated features with the vomiting that can help us find out the cause. Right. And we can find out if the stale food is present, then gastric outlet obstruction, peristalsis and obstruction, visible peristalsis and obstruction, vomiting in the early morning. There can be intracranial neoplasm or cyclic vomiting syndrome. And if hypotonia indicates to mitochondrial syndrome and vertigo, middle ear disorder. The red flags in a child with vomiting include presence of blood or bile in the vomitus. Okay. Severe abdominal pain with abdominal distension or tenderness, projectile vomiting, persistent tachycardia or hypotension. There is neck stiffness and photophobia. These patients may need admission and urgent evaluation. So these are all the red flags. Fine. These are all the red flags in case of vomiting. Let's read this once again because it is important. Presence of blood or bile in the vomitus, any severe abdominal pain with abdominal distension or tenderness. First one was blood or bile. Second one is severe abdominal pain with abdominal distension or tenderness. Then third one is the projectile. Oh no, this is not third one. This is associated with this one only. Presence of severe abdominal pain with abdominal distension or tenderness, projectile vomiting, and persistent tachycardia or hypotension. Neck stiffness and photophobia is the other one. Okay, now moving ahead. Workup for the chronic vomiting depends upon the suspected diagnosis. It includes blood chemistry like the sugar, electrolytes, creatinine, amylase, lipase, and transaminases. Abdominal imaging like the ultrasound abdomen, CT, or MRI abdomen with the small bowel angiography, upper gastrointestinal endoscopy, gastric empty scan, CT or the MRI, metabolic testing or the urine analysis. It is important to remember that the children with the cyclic vomiting should be evaluated during the symptomatic phase before starting intravenous fluid since the investigation may be non-contributory during asymptomatic periods. Okay, so now reading about the evaluation of a child with acute vomiting should include assessment of hydration. So if anyone is presenting with acute vomiting, no, we should assess them for hydration, electrolytes, creatinine, and plain X-ray abdomen in suspected surgical cases. Promethazine and the ondansetron are useful in the post-operative vomiting and to avoid episodes of cyclical vomiting. So when is ondansetron useful in post-operative vomiting and to avoid episodes of cyclical vomiting? Okay. Ondansetron given alone with or with the dexamethasone is preferred for chemotherapy-related vomiting. Domperidone and metoclopramide are useful in patients with gastroparesis. Okay. When is domperidone and metoclopramide used? With patients with gastroparesis. So gastroparesis is primarily a motility problem, not a nausea problem. Like domperidone and metoclopramide are the prokinetic drugs, and they increase the gastric contractions and help the stomach to empty faster, right? But ondansetron is mainly an empty antiemetic. It reduces nausea and vomiting signals, but does not improve the stomach emptying. Fine. So if a patient is having gastroparesis, how will you come to know that patient is having gastroparesis? What will the patient say? Patient will say like he feels early satiety and there is post meal bloating or distension and there is vomiting of undigested food after eating. So in these cases there is slow emptying of the stomach, right? So then you have to give prokinetic agents like domperidone and metoclopramide. But if a patient is telling that he's having nausea and vomiting from gastroenteritis and feeling nauseous all throughout the day, as it happens in viral hepatitis, right? So in that case, you have to give ondansetron. Now the antiemetics like uh, diphenhydramine help in motion sickness. Management of the underlying condition is essential. Some common disorders presenting with the vomiting are described below. So now we are going to read about various conditions that are which present with vomiting. First, we are going to read about the idiopathic hypertrophic pyloric stenosis. Hypertrophic pyloric stenosis is the most common surgical disorder of the gastrointestinal tract in infants. Okay, you have to think about this disease in infants only. The pylorus is thickened and elongated with a narrowing of its lumen due to hypertrophy of the circular muscle fibers. So, what is happening? The pylorus, the end part of the stomach, is thickened and it is elongated with narrowing of its lumen due to hypertrophy of the circular muscle fibers. Now, in clinical presentation, patients present with non-bilious vomiting that gradually increases in frequency and severity to become projectile in nature. So, what will happen in clinical presentation of this IHPS is there will be non-bilious vomiting that gradually increases in frequency and severity, gradually increases, okay, and become projectile in nature. The disorder is 4 to 6 times more common in boys than in girls. More common in boys. Fine. Most patients are symptomatic beyond 3 weeks of age. So symptoms will appear after 3 weeks of age. However, about 20% are symptomatic since birth. Only 20% children are symptomatic since birth. Okay. Constipation is common. Recurrent and persistent vomiting causes dehydration. Because of recurrent persistent vomiting, there will be dehydration, malnutrition, hypochloremic alkalosis. As the stomach muscles contract forcibly to overcome the obstruction, a vigorous peristaltic wave can be seen to move from left hypochondrium to umbilicus, particularly on examining after feed. So we can see a vigorous peristalsis also after feed, and a firm olive-shaped mass is palpable in the mid-epigastrium in 75 to 80% of the infants, especially after feeds. So a olive-shaped mass is palpable in 75 to 80% of the infants. Okay. So what will be the clinical presentation? There will be non-bilious vomiting, which will gradually increase in frequency and severity and become projectile. It is more common in boys. How much more common? 4 to 6 times more common. And when will the symptoms present? Symptoms will present beyond 3 weeks. Beyond 3 weeks. Okay. And 20% are symptomatic only since birth. And because of this recurrent and persistent vomiting, there will be dehydration, malnutrition, and hypochloremic alkalosis. And we can see a vigorous peristalsis also. This peristalsis vein can be seen moving from left hypochondrium to umbilicus, particularly after feed. And we can palpate a olive-shaped mass in the mid-epigastrium in about 80% of the infants, especially after feeds. Okay, so these were some of the important points that we have to keep in mind when thinking about idiopathic hypertrophic pyloric stenosis. Now its evaluation. Ultrasound abdomen is diagnostic, 100% sensitive and 90% specific. So if we are suspecting IHPS, we have to do USG abdomen. It shows thickened muscle thickness and elongated pylorus. So muscle thickening and elongated pylorus will be seen. Muscle thickness will be more than 4 mm and elongated pylorus length will be more than 16 mm. However, in case of doubt, an upper GI barium study or the upper GI endoscopy should be performed. Okay, so the second investigation is upper GI barium study or upper GI endoscopy. In this image, we can see upper gastrointestinal barium study showing a narrowing and elongation of the pyloric channel. See, there is narrowing of this pyloric channel in idiopathic hypertrophic pyloric stenosis. And its management, the treatment includes correction of the dehydration electrolyte abnormalities followed by surgery, and its surgery is called as the Rapsitz pyloromyotomy. Fine. This was all about IHPS. Now we are going to read about cyclic vomiting. This is defined as occurrence of stereotypic episodes of intense nausea and vomiting satisfying the following criteria. When we are going to say cyclic vomiting, when there is stereotypic episodes of intense nausea and vomiting and following satisfying the following criteria: minimum 5 episodes or 3 attacks in 6 months time. Fine. Episodic intense nausea and vomiting lasts 1 hour to 10 days, separated by more than 1 week. Stereotypical vomiting more than 4 times per hour or more than one per hour. Return to the baseline health in between the episodes and not attributed to other metabolic, neurologic, or gastrointestinal disorders, that we will diagnose it as cyclic vomiting. Typically, the attacks begin in the early morning. With symptoms of autonomic surge, lethargy, pallor, mild fever, headache, tachycardia, hypertension, diarrhea, and abdominal pain. Fine, these are all the autonomic surge which can be seen. Lethargy, pallor, mild fever, headache, tachycardia, hypertension, diarrhea, and abdominal pain. Most subjects have onset in the preschool or school age. Okay. When will be the onset? Or preschool or school age. Family history of migraine or motion sickness is noted in 30 to 40% cases of will have family history in 30 to 40% cases. Symptoms may overlap with the abdominal migraine. Okay, age less than 2 years at onset or presence of alarm features like attacks precipitated by fasting, high protein meal, presence of abdominal distension, bilious vomiting, severe pain, or altered mentation, confusion, or irritability needs exclusion of other causes by appropriate investigation. So we have to rule out these all the causes. Okay, and we have to do proper investigations that we have to diagnose this cyclic vomiting. And in the management, what can be done is there are certain known precipitants like fasting and lack of sleep and stress specific dietary components. If there are known precipitants of the episodes, they should be avoided. Okay, and management of the attack includes providing quiet environment, administration of intravenous fluids, use of serotonin 5-HT antagonists such as the ondansetron in the dose of 0.3 to zero point 0.4 mg per kg per dose every 4 to 6 early up to 20 mg, and sedation with the lorazepam can be done in zero point 0.1 mg per kg, 0.05 to zero point 0.1 mg per kg per dose every 6 early. Prophylaxis against the future attacks is recommended in patients with the severe and frequent episodes of vomiting. They include cyprohepatidine. Cyprohepatidine is used for prophylaxis. So what was used for treatment? Administration of a quiet environment, administration of IV fluids, and use of uh, 5-HT antagonists such as ondansetron in this dose, and for sedation lorazepam, and for prophylaxis we are using cyprohepatidine in the dose of 0.25 to 5 mg per kg per day in 2 or 3 divided doses. Okay. Or propranolol in younger children less than 5 years, and amitriptyline initiate at zero point 0.2 to zero point 0.3 mg per kg per day at bedtime may increase up to maximum of 1 to 1.5, or propranolol in older children. So this is used for prophylaxis. Cyprohepatidine, propranolol, or so it is divided in this case, right? First we are seeing in younger children. Younger children we were using cyprohepatidine and propranolol. Then in older children, what we are using, amitriptyline, which is given at the bedtime, or propranolol. This was all about cyclic vomiting. Now the next thing, that is gastroesophageal reflux, we will read in next video. Thank you.